Have you ever felt like you were screaming inside but no one heard you? Like the world around you kept spinning while inside everything was still broken? That day, I wrote the farewell letter, but then the phone rang, and as strange as it may seem, it was this connection, simple, unexpected, almost random, that changed everything. I wasn't on a battlefield, but I was still waging a silent war inside me, a war that no one could see. A battle without bombs, without gunshots, but with deep, invisible wounds. And believe me, sometimes the invisible scars are the ones that hurt the most. If you're here, you may know this kind of pain. Maybe you felt that heaviness in your chest, that feeling of being alone even when surrounded by people. Or maybe you're just trying to understand how someone who survived war could almost lose their life after returning home. Stay with me until the end, because what you discover now may surprise you, and perhaps in some way touch exactly where you need it most. I wasn't the same after the war. The silence bothered me more than the sound of the helicopters. The mirror reflected a familiar face, but one that I no longer recognized. Life went on for everyone, except for me, and when everything seemed to have returned to normal, that's when my own war began. An internal, solitary war where memories became weapons and the mind, the true battlefield. No one prepares you for this, for the emptiness that comes after, for the feeling of being back, but still stuck somewhere back there. People greet you, thank you for your service, call you a hero, but at night when the world goes silent, the ghosts return. And it was on one of those nights, surrounded by dark thoughts, that I made a decision. That morning, I sat on the edge of my bed. I grabbed a pen and paper. I began to write words that no one should write. A calm, cold, almost mechanical goodbye. And as I wrote, I felt a strange peace, as if, finally, the noise inside me would be silenced. That was when the phone rang. A touch. Simple. An ordinary sound. But that night it was like a cry for help coming from outside the trench. It was a voice. A presence. A simple question on the other end of the line. Are you okay? And as much as I wanted to lie, something inside me broke in that moment. Have you ever been there? A moment when a simple human connection pulled you out of a silent abyss? Because sometimes that's what saves you. Being reminded that you still matter, that someone still cares, that the pain you carry may be invisible, but it doesn't have to be lonely. And it was exactly there, in that seemingly banal phone call, that my story began to change. It wasn't all at once. It wasn't easy. But it was there that something began to be reborn. And what happened after that phone call is perhaps the most unexpected part of this whole story. And what happened after that phone call is perhaps the most unexpected part of this whole story. Because the pain didn't disappear overnight. It was still there, silent, trying to hide in the corners of routine. But at that moment, something inside me changed. I realized that there was still a thread, even if fragile, that connected me to life. And sometimes, all we need is a small reason, a simple word, a reminder that we are still seen, that we are still missed. Maybe you're going through something similar, or maybe you know someone who's struggling in silence, just like I did. So, if this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what touched you the most. Share your experience, even if it's just a few words. You never know who might be reached by what you have to say. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. When you comment, like, or subscribe, you are helping this message reach where it really needs to go. You are helping to build a space where stories like this are not just heard, they are felt, welcomed, and in some way, healed. So if this touched your heart in any way, click the like button so that YouTube understands that this topic matters. And if you want to continue following real, profound stories that talk about new beginnings, subscribe to the channel. Here, each video is a reminder that pain can leave its mark, but it doesn't have to define who we are. And it was after that night, after that phone call, that I began, little by little, to understand that living with scars is possible, and that perhaps they can even show a new path. Before the war, I was just another ordinary guy trying to live life the right way. I didn't have grand plans to change the world, but I did have simple dreams. To start a family, open a small workshop, maybe even teach my kids to ride bikes in the backyard I would still have. I liked old music, barbecues with friends on Sundays, and those nice silences you find in the middle of an empty road. I had an easy smile, restful eyes, and I believed, truly, that everything would work out if I followed the right path. The decision to enlist did not come on impulse, it came from a sense of duty, from that kind of ideal that they say is greater than ourselves. I believed that protecting other lives was a noble way of giving meaning to my own. But what no one tells you, and perhaps they don't even know how to explain, is how much the war doesn't end when you return home. The war hides in the details, in the way you hear a door slam, in the fright you feel when you see a shadow passing quickly, in the emptiness that invades you in moments when everything should be fine. But back then, I was still whole. My parents were proud. My younger sister called me her hero. And me? I carried in my heart the hope of coming back as a better person. I just had no idea how hard it would be to find again the man I was before I left. Many people think that transformation only happens on the battlefield, but it starts long before that. It starts with the decisions we make without knowing the cost. It starts with the way we gradually let go, little by little, of what made us human. At first it's subtle. You get used to sleeping on alert, to not trusting silence, to hardening your gaze so as not to be shaken by what's in front of you. With each mission, with each loss, a part of you falls by the wayside, until one day, you look in the mirror and no longer recognize who's there. And I remember exactly the moment I felt it for the first time. I had just returned from a long patrol. I felt exhausted, but something inside me couldn't relax. I lay down on my bunk, closed my eyes, and saw the face of a friend, one of those you never forget. He didn't come back, and in that moment I realized that the worst thing wasn't losing someone. It was carrying on, carrying the guilt of having come back when he couldn't. That's when the silence stopped being rest and started being torture. When I finally returned home, the welcome was warm, family gathered, flags, smiles. But inside me, everything was out of place. It's hard to explain to someone who has never experienced this. You are there, but at the same time you are not. You are present in the body, but the mind is still in the desert, still hearing explosions, still expecting the worst. The feeling of disconnection is brutal, and the scariest thing is that no one notices. You learn to smile automatically, to respond, "Everything is fine," as a shield. But inside, everything screams. This contrast between who I was and who I became again consumed me. Before, I believed that my strength came from courage. Today I know that true strength comes from vulnerability. It comes from recognizing that something is broken and having the courage to ask for help. But at the beginning I didn't know that. All I wanted was to go back to being that light, dreamy man full of simple plans. But he seemed to have gotten stuck somewhere in the past. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there's a hidden truth that almost no one talks about. Sometimes the hardest pain to face isn't the pain that comes from what happened, but the pain that comes from what could have been, from the life we didn't live, from the versions of ourselves we had to let go of. And when that's combined with the feeling of not belonging, a kind of emptiness is born that seems impossible to fill. That's when many people start to shut up. Because how can you explain a sadness that you don't even understand? How can you put into words the weight of memories that you wanted to forget, but that insist on coming back every time you close your eyes? Little by little you start to believe that no one will understand, that it's better to swallow it all and move on. But how can you move on if you can't feel the ground beneath your feet? The cruelest thing is that, on the outside, everything seems normal. You go out, you work, you talk. But on the inside your mind lives behind the scenes of the war. It's as if there were a theater where you play the role of someone who is fine, while the real you is stuck in the wings, screaming for help, and no one listens. It was at this point in my journey that I began to realize that the problem wasn't just what I had experienced. It was what I had failed to experience because of it. The decisions that seemed right at the time, but took me away from myself. The iron mentality I had been taught to have, but which prevented me from feeling. The traumas I denied, but which shaped my every step, even in silence. And maybe you can relate to this too. You don't have to have been to war. Sometimes life itself hurts like a battlefield. A loss, a rejection, a deep disappointment. All of this can leave invisible scars that we carry without really understanding how to deal with them. But there is a turning point. A moment when we need to stop running away from ourselves and face everything that haunts us. And as difficult as it may seem, that's when transformation begins. Comment here. I'm on this journey too, just so I know you're here with me in this conversation. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because as much as it seems impossible to translate into words what war does to us inside, there is a truth that needs to be said. The hardest battle is not the one we face with weapons, but the one we fight within our souls after the sound of gunfire has died down. I remember the smell of dust mixed with metal, the unbearable heat that made my skin burn even under my uniform. But those weren't the things that broke me. What really broke me was the sound of goodbyes that came without warning, the sudden silence after an explosion, the empty eyes of someone who, moments before, was telling jokes next to me. Every mission carried the risk of not coming back, and even when we did, something was always left behind. Fear became routine. It was no longer a sign of weakness. It was part of the machinery that kept us alert. At every corner, with every sudden movement, the possibility that it could all end there hung over us like a constant shadow. Over time, you learn not to show it. You learn to swallow your panic, to hide the trembling in your hands. But inside, the entire system is collapsing. I saw men who seemed invincible crumble in the silence of the early morning. I saw tears hidden under dirty pillows, and prayers whispered by those who swore they believed in nothing. When the body is on high alert all the time, the mind begins to take over, and that's when I understood. The true impact of war was not just physical, it was mental, it was invisible, it was lonely. There was one night in particular that I have never forgotten. We were in a small village and the mission was simple: scout, ensure safety, and return. But nothing went as planned. The tension was in the air from the beginning. Every step was a decision. And in that environment where any sound could be the last, your mind begins to create images, scenes, and outcomes, all tragic. You see yourself dying several times before anything even happens. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the guilt of being afraid, of looking to the side and seeing your younger companion trying to hide the terror in his eyes, and you feeling like an imposter for also being terrified. Because the image of the strong, unshakable soldier, shaped by films and speeches about bravery, doesn't match what we really feel when we're there, breathing in uncertainty. And this disconnect between who we are and who we should be gradually tears us apart. That mission ended without casualties. And yet, I lost something that night. Maybe my innocence, maybe my ability to trust in time. Because from that moment on, even in moments of calm, I could no longer relax. Everything seemed like a trap disguised as routine. It was as if the war had taken hold of me, like a program running in the background that consumed all my energy, even when the screen was off. As the months went by, I began to lose all sense of what was normal. Feeling afraid became normal. Not being able to sleep became normal. Waking up in the middle of the night with my heart racing became normal. Not trusting anyone became normal. And this new normality took over me. I began to distance myself from who I was before, not by choice, but for survival. War has its own codes. There, you don't talk about what you feel. You don't expose your weaknesses. You don't show that something has affected you. You learn to function, like a machine programmed to follow orders and move forward. But the soul is not made of steel, and at some point it starts to crack. You start to carry not only the weight of the backpack, but the weight of memories. And some of them weigh so much that they bend the spine of hope. It's hard to explain to someone who's never experienced it. How can you say that the sound of a pot lid falling can throw you to the ground in a defensive position, or that sometimes the silence of your own room is more deafening than any bombing? These are the invisible scars that war leaves. They don't bleed, they don't need bandages, but they hurt, a lot. And the more you try to hide it, the more it grows. Fear becomes a habit, anger becomes a shield, and sadness becomes a place where you learn to live. Until one day, you realize you don't know how to go back. Back to trust, back to feeling, back to living. War changes everything. It redefines what you call home, what you call peace, what you call yourself. You can be thousands of miles away from the battlefield and still feel the metallic taste of tension every day. And the cruelest thing is that when you come back, the world expects you to move on. It expects you to be grateful for having survived. But surviving is not the same as living, and no one teaches you how to rebuild what was shattered without making a fuss. Over time, I began to understand that it wasn't just about forgetting what happened, but about giving it new meaning, turning pain into awareness, triggers into warnings, guilt into compassion. And that's when the idea of healing stopped seeming distant, because healing deep down isn't about erasing the past, it's about giving it new meaning. Comment here. That makes sense to me. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the truth is that no one prepares you for what happens after you return. All the training, all the emotional rigidity, Everything you learn to survive there becomes an obstacle when you step back onto safe ground. The initial feeling is of relief, of course. You cross the arrival gate, see familiar faces, expected hugs, sincere smiles. But inside, something doesn't accompany that moment, as if your soul is still stuck at the last checkpoint, at that last look back before boarding. The strangest thing of all is that the war itself has a logic. It's harsh, it's unfair, but it has rules. You know what you need to do. It has a mission, it has order, it has focus. When you come back, everything seems too loose, and that should be good, but it's not. Because the chaos outside may have ended, but the chaos inside is just beginning. The world around you continues to function as if nothing had changed, but you no longer see things the same way. The music on the radio seems out of place, the traffic sounds too irritating, the noises of the city are confusing, and the peace you thought you would find simply doesn't fit you anymore. It's hard to explain how the body is there, but the mind is still there. Waking up with your heart racing becomes routine, scanning the room for some invisible threat, analyzing every sound, sitting at the table with your family, but with your thoughts on another continent. It's like living a second existence, one where you pretend to be fine, but everything inside you is trying to survive a war that no one else sees. People ask, "So, how was it?" with genuine curiosity, but you don't know what to say. If you talk too much, you feel like you're exposing a part of yourself that you'd rather bury. If you talk too little, it feels like you're hiding something important. So you learn to smile and say, "It was fine," an acceptable lie to keep superficial connections intact. But this decision to hide, even if it seems small, shapes the way you relate to the world. Little by little, you stop feeling like you belong. This is the hidden truth that no one likes to talk about. Returning is not the end of pain, it is the beginning of it. Because now it no longer has the uniform to hide behind. It no longer has a mission to justify the hardening. You return to a reality where you are expected to return to being the same as before. But how? If what you saw changed you forever, how can you continue a life that stopped the moment you got on that plane? That's when the feeling of displacement grows. You start to wonder where your place in the world is. The work that once made you proud now seems empty. Conversations seem shallow. And even when surrounded by people, loneliness weighs like lead. It's not loneliness due to lack of company. It's the loneliness of someone who can no longer explain themselves, of someone who feels like they've lost their common language with the world. You change your mindset without realizing it. You start to see every situation through the lens of survival. Everything becomes a potential threat. Every unfamiliar face carries a warning, and this constant mental vigilance is exhausting. At home, you try to maintain a routine, breakfast, appointments, even a forced smile or two. But inside, it's like watching your own life unfold from the outside. You see everything, participate in everything, but you feel like you're behind thick glass, where sounds are muffled and emotions can't get through. It's as if someone has turned off the internal volume, and you continue moving on automatic. And when he is finally alone, the mask falls. The weight of everything that has been swallowed, disguised, ignored, comes to the surface. It is at this time that the mind screams, that the triggers light up without warning, that the dark thoughts approach like silent shadows. Because in this silence the war returns, and it returns with everything. It returns with faces, sounds, smells. It returns with memories that you fought to bury, but that refuse to stay in the past. It is in this silence that many get lost. The impact of this on your identity is profound. You start to wonder who you are now, the soldier, the civilian, a confusing mix of the two? Or is it that deep down, you are no one at all? That is the gnawing doubt, because what once gave you meaning, the purpose, the discipline, the feeling of being part of something bigger, has now dissolved, and you are left trying to find the same level of meaning in an ordinary life that seems too small compared to what you have faced. This is where many people make the mistake of thinking they have to face everything alone, that asking for help is a sign of weakness, that talking about what they feel is a waste of time. And this mentality of isolation only deepens the hole, because what could be a moment of transition turns into an emotional prison. The backstage of the mind becomes a labyrinth where it is difficult to find a way out. But there is a turning point, a moment that doesn't come with fanfare, nor with a divine light descending from the sky. Sometimes it comes in a phrase said by someone you didn't even expect, in a look of understanding, in a simple gesture, like a text message or a phone call in the middle of the night. It's in these details that the process of transformation begins. A slow process, almost imperceptible at first, but real. Because the way out of this labyrinth is not in forgetting what happened, but in understanding how to live with it without letting it define you. And as contradictory as it may seem, accepting that you have changed is the first step to finding who you really are. Not the same person you were before, not the idealized person, but the real person. The person who carries scars, yes, but who still has a heart beating beneath them. Who can still feel, allow himself, and start over. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is a point in this journey that changes everything, and it is not a moment full of light or clarity. In fact, it is quite the opposite. It is that dark, suffocating, silent moment where everything seems to have stopped making sense, where the body is present, but the soul is exhausted, where the accumulated pain, pushed inside day after day, finally overflows, and you see no way out. I remember that day as if it were still playing out somewhere in my mind. It was an ordinary afternoon, with a clear sky, the world outside following its own rhythm, and that's why it hurt so much. Because inside me everything was in ruins, but on the outside everything seemed the same. The house was silent. The television was on, but the sound was muted. The walls felt tighter than ever, as if each room was shrinking around me. I felt like I was running out of air, even with all the windows open. It was a kind of pain that doesn't scream, but suffocates. A tiredness that can't be explained by a few hours of sleep. It was as if I was carrying the weight of all the days I hadn't cried, all the words I had swallowed, all the memories I had tried to lock away. And that day, I could no longer pretend that everything was okay. The hidden truth that I had hidden even from myself came to the surface in a brutal way. I felt useless, out of place, as if my presence no longer made sense in any environment. The things that had once given me strength now seemed empty. No calls, no messages, no plans for the future. Nothing, just that silence. Heavy, cruel, definitive. I sat on the floor of the living room with a piece of paper in my hand. A blank sheet of paper that, at that moment, seemed to be the only one that would listen to me. I started writing a letter. It wasn't angry. It wasn't dramatic. It was almost cold, as if I was just putting an end to a chapter that was too long. Each word was a farewell, and the more I wrote, the more distant I felt from everything that had once brought me hope. It was as if I was trying to explain the inexplicable, to justify a decision that not even I fully understood, but that seemed to be the only way to stop the pain. The funny thing is that even in this extreme moment, I still tried to protect others. I wrote that it was no one's fault, that they had done their best for me, that it was an internal, lonely pain, something that no one could cure. This is one of the cruelest traps of the mind. It convinces you that you are a burden, that your absence will be less painful than your presence, that by giving up you are actually relieving others. And it was then, right at that moment, with the pen still in my hand and my eyes brimming with tears, that something unexpected happened. The phone rang, a regular, repetitive, insistent ring. At first I thought about ignoring it. Then I thought it might be someone random, unimportant, but the ringing continued, and for some reason I can't even explain, I answered it. On the other end of the line, the voice of a childhood friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in months, maybe years. She said she didn't know why, but she'd felt the urge to call me, that something about her had made her think of me all day. And at that moment, at that exact moment, my voice broke. The pen fell to the floor, and for the first time in a long time, I cried, really cried, not out of anger, not out of despair, but out of relief. Like someone had opened a window in a room with no air. She didn't give any inspiring speeches. She didn't say any set phrases. She just listened. And after a few minutes, she said, "You still have a lot to live for, even if you don't see it now." And that echoed in my mind in a strange way, because part of me wanted to doubt it, but another part, the part that thought I had already died, clung to those words like someone finding a rope at the bottom of a well. The call didn't solve everything. I didn't hang up and become a new person. It wasn't like that. But in that moment, something inside me broke. That ice, that invisible armor, that absolute certainty that the end was inevitable, all of it cracked. And in those cracks, for the first time in a long time, a little light entered. The impact of that moment was so real that even today, when the pain tries to return, I remember this detail. Sometimes, What saves you is not a miracle. It's a phone call, a phrase, a simple gesture, a reminder that you are still seen, that you still matter, that your existence has value even when you don't feel it. And that is what so many people fail to see in the midst of pain, that it is temporary, even when it seems eternal, that there is a part of us that wants to live, even when everything screams otherwise, that behind every destructive thought, there is still a spark of hope asking to be heard. Sometimes, all that is needed is a sign, a touch, an unexpected encounter. Comment here. That makes sense to me. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there are things that cannot be explained logically, but that completely change the course of a life. The call I received that day was not just any phone call. It was as if someone had reached out at the last second when I was already on the edge of the cliff. And perhaps the most striking thing was not what was said, but the simple fact that someone thought of me for no apparent reason. In the midst of the deepest loneliness, someone remembered that I existed. On the other end of the line was Carla's voice. A friend from my teenage years, one of those friends that life naturally takes away over time, but that somehow remains hidden in a silent place in my memory. I hadn't spoken to her in years. And yet, that day, at that exact moment, she called me. She said she had dreamed about me the night before, that she had spent the whole day with a discomfort in her chest, a strange sensation, as if she needed to hear me, and she couldn't ignore it. She picked up the phone and dialed, without even knowing if I would answer. Her voice was shaking a little, perhaps from the nervousness of not knowing how I would react, but it wasn't what she was saying that touched me. It was the sound of presence, the simple fact that there was someone there, someone real, interested, concerned, and that's when my mind, which had been immersed in a heavy fog, began to open a small gap. That unexpected connection broke through a wall that I didn't even know I had built so high. As she spoke, I began to realize something I had never realized before. How much, even when I was silent, I was sending signals. How much my distance, my silence, my cold "I'm fine" were screaming inside, even if no one could hear it clearly. But somehow, that signal reached her, and in that moment, it was as if God had told me, in a simple, human way, that there was still something here, that there was still a purpose, that there was still a path. Carla didn't know I had written a letter. I had no idea what was happening at that moment. She just followed an impulse, and that impulse changed everything. Because sometimes life comes down to this: a simple choice made by someone who decided to act even without understanding why. The impact of this cannot be measured in words. It is felt in the body, in the heart that starts beating strongly again, in the breathing that starts circulating with less heaviness. I hung up the phone after almost an hour of talking, and I stood there, still, holding the phone in my hand as if I still needed confirmation that it had really happened. I looked at the letter I had started to write. It was still there on the floor, but now it seemed like something far away, a draft of a version of myself that, by a thread, did not become final. In that moment, I understood that being alive was not just a physical state, it was a decision, and that even if the pain had not gone away, it was no longer alone inside me. The most curious thing is that Carla didn't have any ready answers. She didn't try to convince me of anything. She didn't say any motivational phrases. She just stayed, present, human, real, and that was enough. Sometimes we think we need to say the right thing, make the perfect gesture, find the exact words. But what really saves us is not well-crafted speeches. It's affection. It's genuine interest. It's the presence that breaks the cycle of invisibility. In the days that followed, I still stumbled a lot. The pain didn't go away overnight, but now there was a glimmer of light, and a constant reminder. If that connection happened when everything was hanging by a thread, maybe there was something bigger behind it all. Maybe what I called a coincidence was, in fact, an invitation to see life from another angle. A reminder that, even when everything seems lost, there are still revelations that time is responsible for revealing. And this experience taught me something powerful, that behind the scenes of what we call the end, there are often quiet beginnings. That sometimes what keeps us here is something as subtle as an unexpected touch, and that there is a profound impact in being seen, truly seen, by someone. Not as a number, not as a statistic, not as the one who survived the war, but as a person who still has the right to continue, to feel, to begin again. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because after that phone call, something silent began to happen inside me. It wasn't a snap. It wasn't a sudden change or an immediate miracle. It was more like a timid, wavering flame, emerging amidst the rubble, trying to ignite in an environment where everything still smelled of smoke and despair. But it was there, fragile, yes, but alive, and the mere fact that it existed was more than I imagined possible in those days. In the early days, nothing seemed different to those who saw me from the outside. I still had the same broken habits, the same long silences, the same deep and lost eyes. But inside, the weight no longer crushed me with the same force. It still hurt, but there was a new space where before there had only been despair. A space that began to be occupied by questions that I had not even allowed myself to ask before. What if there is still something here for me? What if this pain, somehow, can serve something greater than me? This transition was subtle. It started when I started responding to messages that I had previously ignored. When I decided to leave the house for no particular reason, just to feel the wind and look at people on the street. A random cafe became a point of observation for life to happen. And even without really understanding what I was looking for, I knew I needed to see that the world was still turning, that life was still pulsing outside my bubble of pain. One of the most memorable moments was when I decided to visit a veteran support center. I confess that I went in with some reservations. It sounded like just another place where I would have to listen to memorized words, generic advice, and pats on the back. But it wasn't like that. There I found looks that carried the same weight as mine, men and women, who had also returned from war with their bodies intact, but with their souls in pieces. And for the first time in a long time, I felt understood without having to explain anything. I started listening to stories. Some seemed like mirrors of my own. Others were even more painful. And that's when something started to make sense. If my pain was so similar to theirs, maybe my healing was connected to them too. Maybe by listening I could talk. Maybe by supporting I could sustain myself. And that thought, that shift in mindset, brought me something I thought I would never feel again: belonging. In the weeks that followed, I returned more often, sometimes to talk, sometimes just to be there. No one demanded presence, no one demanded progress. But in that space, between sincere stories and shared silences, I began to rebuild a part of myself that I thought I had lost. And more than that, I began to realize that there was something I could still offer. Even though I was hurt, I could be useful. Even without all the answers, I could be a listening ear, a presence, a point of support. This discovery was the beginning of a new journey. The pain that had previously paralyzed me began to take on a new form. It became fuel. Not as a reason to victimize myself, but as a bridge to reach others who were also on the brink. I discovered that carrying scars was not synonymous with weakness. It was a sign that I had survived, and that these marks, visible or not, could be used to light the path for those who were still in the dark. I started writing, first in old notebooks, then in letters I never sent, and later in anonymous posts on the internet. Simple, unpretentious words, but full of truth. I talked about what I felt, about the good days and the bad ones. And, to my surprise, responses started coming in. People said, "I thought I was the only one who felt this way. You wrote what I didn't know how to say." And those responses showed me a truth that has stuck with me. Sometimes when you talk about what hurts you, you're not just healing yourself, you're helping someone else not give up too. And that's how pain became a mission. Not in a heroic or grandiose way, but in a real human way. Turning suffering into purpose is a choice that isn't made all at once. It's a decision that is renewed every day, especially on the days when you just want to go back to the hole. And there were many of those days. But now I knew I wasn't alone anymore. That every step I took could have an invisible impact on someone's life. And that gave me the strength to keep going, even though I was limping inside. Transforming this pain wasn't easy. It tried to trick me several times. It tried to come back with a vengeance, telling me that none of this would make any difference, that I was just passing the time, pretending I was okay. But the truth is, the more I opened up, the more I understood that healing isn't about erasing what happened. It's about carrying it more lightly. It's about making peace with what has already happened, and giving new meaning to what is yet to come. Today, I see that that call from Carla wasn't just a turning point. It was the wake-up call that allowed me to start seeing what I had never seen before. That pain shaped me, yes, but it didn't define me. That it left marks, but it didn't seal my fate. And that there is a silent strength in moving forward even when the ground still seems unstable. This is the strength that no one sees but moves everything. Comment here. That makes sense to me. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is a point in the journey where the pain which used to drag you down starts to push you forward, and it doesn't just disappear, it just changes roles. From a silent enemy, it becomes a kind of compass. It shows you paths that you would never have seen if you hadn't gone through the darkness. It was like that for me. Little by little, I began to realize that it wasn't enough to just survive. I needed to transform it into something that went beyond me, because keeping everything to myself no longer made sense. The hidden truth that I carried inside my chest needed to have a voice. And if my story could touch someone, then it was no longer just mine. It was during this process of reconstruction that I began attending listening sessions for veterans. At first, I just listened. I paid attention to the details, the way their eyes would twitch when an old trauma was recalled, the long pauses, the lump in the throat that would appear between seemingly simple sentences. I knew exactly what each silence meant, and this created a connection that no technique could create. It was as if the pains recognized each other, and in that space where there was no judgment, something began to form. The idea that what I had experienced did not have to end in tragedy. It could become a bridge, support, purpose. Over time, I started talking too, first sharing little bits of my experience, then encouraging others to do the same. I didn't use rehearsed speeches or punchy phrases. I just spoke about what I had experienced and the truth, and that's what worked. Because deep down, everyone just wants to feel understood. And when someone who has also been hurt looks at you and says, "I know what it's like, but I also know that you can move on," that has a different impact. Real, living. It was there that I understood one of the greatest revelations of this journey, that helping someone doesn't require you to be completely healed. It only requires that you be willing to reach out even with your scars. And perhaps that's exactly what makes this gesture so powerful, because people don't connect with perfection. They connect with humanity, with presence, with authenticity. Little by little, I expanded this work. I started writing anonymous letters, addressed to people who might be going through the same thing I had. Sincere, direct letters, full of empathy and without any intention of giving ready-made advice. Some of these letters ended up in hospitals, others in support groups, others in the hands of people I had never met. But the feedback came, in the form of messages, stories, and suppressed tears. And that was when it finally hit me. The pain that had almost killed me was now saving lives. Not because I had a formula, but because I had a story, and because I decided not to hide it anymore. I also found purpose in something I had never tried before: volunteering. I joined a small organization that provided food, books, discussion groups, and emotional support to people in vulnerable situations. They were ex-military personnel, but also young people in recovery, broken families, and people invisible to society. And there, with each simple gesture, I saw a new strength emerge within me, not because I felt important, but because I saw how small actions could have a big impact. It was in this context that I rediscovered something that had been lost for a long time: faith. Not a rigid religious faith, but a living, pulsating faith that arises from the recognition that there is something greater guiding us, even when everything seems chaotic. A faith that does not demand answers but offers presence. I began to pray again, at first, just in my thoughts, then in a low voice, and over time, in sincere conversations. Like someone talking to a friend they haven't seen for a long time, but who has always been there. This reconnection brought me new clarity. I realized that for a long time, I had tried to carry everything alone, as if that were proof of strength. But true strength came when I learned to trust, to share, to open up. When I understood that my life didn't have to have a tragic ending to have meaning, that there was a path, however narrow, between pain and purpose, and that I no longer needed to walk it in fear, because now I knew where I was going. Over time, what was once a burden became a mission, not an official mission, with uniform and insignia, but a silent mission, which begins with paying attention, listening without interrupting, being present when no one else is. And this, as simple as it may seem, has an incalculable value. Today, when I look back, I no longer see only losses. I see seeds, things that sprouted from the dry ground of pain, and that today bear fruit in the form of encounters, conversations, hugs, listening. It is a different kind of fight, yes, but this time, the fight is to keep hope alive, and in this battle, every gesture counts. Every story matters. Every life has a role. Comment here. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because maybe, as you listen to this, you are exactly at that point where everything inside you seems about to fall apart. Maybe you are living days where the world keeps turning, but inside everything is still. Maybe you are fighting against something that no one sees, that no one notices, that you yourself try to hide. And if that is the case, I want to tell you with all the truth that I carry, I understand. I have been there. I know what it is like to wake up and see no reason. I know what it is like to smile with your face and scream inside. I know what it is like to silently wonder if anyone would notice your absence. If you're listening to this and you feel like you're at your limit, just hold on a little longer. Just one more day. Just one more minute. Not because I have all the answers, but because sometimes all we need is someone to tell us you're not alone. Because you're not. The pain makes you believe that you are. That no one would understand. That no one would care. That your story is too much for anyone else to carry. But that's a lie. And I can prove it to you with my own story. For a long time, I thought I was weak for feeling what I felt. I demanded courage from myself. I was ashamed of my sadness. I thought that admitting pain was a loss, but it isn't. Admitting pain is the first step to transforming everything. That's where real confrontation begins. It's in that moment of opening up, even if it's just to yourself, that something starts to move. And no matter how small it may seem, that movement is already life pulsing again. The hidden truth that few people talk about is that pain has no face. It can be disguised in the face of someone who laughs loudly, who works hard, who is always surrounded. And maybe you are playing that role, following the script that is expected of you, while inside everything is cracking. And if that is the case, I just want you to know, you don't have to keep pretending, you don't have to carry yourself alone. You have the right to feel, the right to fall, the right to ask for help. That doesn't make you less of a person. It makes you human. It's easy to romanticize overcoming obstacles, as if they were a graph that only goes up. But in practice, it's an uneven path, full of setbacks, dark days, and small, silent victories. The real journey has no background music or applause. It has slow steps. There are mornings when getting out of bed is already an achievement. And I want to say, that counts. You're trying. You're still here. That in itself is strength. If you've made it this far in this video to this point in the conversation, I believe it wasn't by chance. Maybe what brought you here is this internal discomfort, this weight that seems to have no name. And maybe this is the time to give it a voice, to let it out. It doesn't have to be for everyone. It starts with you. It starts by accepting that it's hurting, and that it's okay to hurt. It's not a sign of weakness, and it's a sign that something needs to be taken care of, looked at with more care, more attention. And I tell you this not as someone who has their life figured out, but as someone who has decided to keep going, even without understanding everything, even without being sure of tomorrow. Because we don't need to see the whole path to take the first step. Sometimes all it takes is deciding not to stop. And I know that this decision is tiring. Sometimes it needs to be made several times in the same day. But it's worth it. Every time you choose to keep going, you are building something invisible, but real. A story of overcoming. If you feel like you're at the end of your rope, try breathing. Close your eyes for a moment. Feel the sound of your breathing. You're still here. And that's reason enough to believe that there's still a way forward. Even if you can't see it now, there's more. There's life after this hole. There's affection, reunion, meaning. There's a possible transformation that begins when you stop blaming yourself and start really listening to yourself. You don't have to be strong all the time. You don't have to understand everything all at once. You just have to let yourself keep going. And if at any point it all seems too dark, remember this. Sometimes it's deep down that we find a new foundation. A new starting point, a new way of seeing the world, and of seeing ourselves in it. Comment here. That makes sense to me. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because after everything you've heard here, there may still be a part of you trying to understand why this story touched you so much. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the unspoken scream. Maybe what kept you here was this strange feeling of familiarity, as if somehow I was telling your story too, even without knowing you. And the truth is that, deep down, we all carry pieces of the same pain, even with different faces and contexts. At some point, we all go through nights when the pillow weighs more than our bodies, when tomorrow seems like just another empty echo of today. And it's in these moments that a sincere word can make all the difference. Seeing someone express what they feel inside has a real impact, because pain feeds on silence and silence feeds loneliness. It's a cruel cycle, but when we break it, even if it's with a simple phrase, a comment, a small gesture, we break something important. We make room for healing. And healing in this context doesn't mean erasing the scars, but looking at them with less fear, with more understanding, with a more generous view of who we are. This story that I told here, with all the details, weaknesses, falls, and new beginnings, was not just about me. It was about all those who once felt invisible, irrelevant, worthless. And if you got to this point, it is because somehow you recognized something of yourself in these words. Maybe an old pain, maybe a recent battle, or maybe just the tiredness of having to appear strong all the time. Either way, just being here, continuing to follow, already shows that something in you wants to live, something in you still believes, even if it is just a breath, that there is more. And there is more. There is life after the fall. There is meaning after the emptiness. There is a new beginning after the end. But this only starts to become real when we decide to stop hiding, when we find the courage to be seen as we really are, without filters, without masks. And this, as difficult as it may be, is one of the most powerful acts of self-love that anyone can have. So, if this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. It could be someone who has never said anything, who hides it well, who always says they are okay. Sometimes it is precisely this person who is at the limit. Leave a comment telling us about your experience, or tag someone who is struggling in silence. Your word could be what will spark a change in another heart. And if you want more stories of overcoming like this, subscribe to the channel now. You are not alone. Comment here. I'm on this journey too. If you've made it this far, really, thank you for following me until the end of this conversation. It's a sign that something inside you connected with what was said, and that's no small thing. We went through a lot together in this video. Memories, pain, reflections. And if all of this made sense to you, then this space is yours too. If you want to continue being part of this journey, subscribe to the channel. Here we talk about stories that transform, real battles and new beginnings that arise from the darkness. And every time you like the video, comment, or simply stay tuned, this strengthens this exchange. It gives meaning to all of this. By the way, if you've stayed this far, write in the comments, "I'm with you until the end." It is our silent way of recognizing ourselves in others, of showing that there are still people who feel, who listen, who walk together. And if this video touched you in any way, leave a like so we know it's worth continuing to bring you this type of content. There is a video here on the side that complements this subject. Click and continue with me there. The conversation is not over yet.